Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of Faith Unaltered. Tonight, I am the main host, Joshua Davidson. With me is our brother man, Tyler Fowler, and our new favorite friend, Dane Von Ace. Dane's number one. How you fellas doing tonight?
Good, brother.
I'm wonderful, man. Glad to be here.
Good. I'm glad you're here, man. With us tonight is joining us again, Spencer Owen, our favorite atonement-flavored friend.
Hello.
How you doing, bud?
Yeah,
And then
really
again
good.
is our Catholic exorcism friend, Nicholas Solder. How you doing, buddy?
Hey, Josh. Good to see you, man.
Right on. It's interesting that we have a bunch of guests that have already been here tonight, so intros are going to be a little scantily clad, I suppose, but that's fine. Our topic for tonight is going to be a part 2 continuation of our discussion, Dane and I's discussion from a few weeks back, talking about the coming death of a materialistic worldview. By materialism, we don't mean I want to go out and buy stuff and be a consumer. We mean that material reality is not all there is. That nature is more than just material stuff. That's the
Praise
easiest.
God.
And thank God for that. Exactly.
Right.
Because of that, we have all kinds of remarkable things like truth, goodness, beauty, love, trust, just the absolute wonder that it is to be in relationship with one another, and the fact that I can meet your acquaintance. Praise God for all that. Seriously. So, off top, is there anything that anybody wanted to say about the first episode? Kind of quick recap. Dane and I went over a few things about what we see in the broader scope of society, as far as what materialism looks like and what the modern world is doing. Let's say not necessarily in a rebellion against materialism, but almost the calling cards of people finally coming to a place where we're recognizing, granted in a really odd way, but we're recognizing that we're not reducible to our bodies, that real life is something that's a lot more complex than just the material stuff that everything is made of. And also, finally, that there's something more to the human person than just what you're made of, and one of the things that we brought out in that particular discussion was this odd carnival-esque jester-like appearance of the immaterial person in the political identity world. We talked about identity and the soul quite a bit in that episode. And so I wanted to kind of first off leave the floor open for a second to see if anybody wanted to go over one of those things. I know, Spencer, you had a couple of things that you wanted to say about the soul, the immaterial self, and the soul spirit distinction that we were talking about in the last episode. And I'm really curious to hear about that. But also, Nicholas, I know that you got to sit through that. And I was wondering if you guys, from listening to the first one, have any feedback that you'd like to go over first before moving on to a new facet of this.
Well, for those of you who don't know, my day job is as a counselor, a mental health therapist, and I work primarily with people who have experienced trauma of various kinds. Specifically, spiritual trauma is kind of my area of expertise. But one of the ways that I try to approach the work that I do with trauma is by working on what's called a somatic approach, which is a very body-oriented approach, and trying to work at not just simply like getting the body to kind of respond differently to stimuli, but more importantly, and one of the ways I frame it to my clients is getting body and spirit and mind and soul, like everything, all to be better aligned, and working together as a cohesive unit. Because one of the major features of trauma is that it fragments, and so people wind up in this situation where, like one of the things you said, Josh, that really stuck with me was how sometimes the body can't trust. And that's exactly what I see every single day, where someone's in a situation where their mind, like their prefrontal cortex, their kind of higher order thinking is telling them, it's okay, you can trust this person, this is a safe place. But their body remembers. One of the primary kind of people in the field is Bessel van der Kolk, and he wrote a book called The Body Keeps the Score. That's what happens, is that like the body remembers those things. And so as I was listening to everything you were talking about last time, it just really struck me from a counseling perspective, from a psychology perspective, just how vital it is to see the whole person and work with the whole person and integrate every facet of the person, including the spiritual dimension, and not just simply either neglect the body or have an overemphasis on the body. So,
and that what you're talking about is having like it's almost like a holistic authenticity to your person, where like,
yes,
the inside and the outside behavior and thought life both map together, that there's no discontinuity. I can see how that definitely would tie into the idea of trust, because you can't, That's a good way of putting it too. Past traumas will almost infiltrate and break you up. Like you'll become compartmentalized. Well, often we think that our thinking about the world, we're compartmentalizing the world, but we don't often think we're being compartmentalized by what we encounter in the world. Yeah.
Right. Well, and actually and along with my somatic approach, one of the other types of therapy that I do is something called internal family systems, or IFS therapy. And the basic premise there is that a human being is not just, a unitary individual, but rather like a multiplicity of multiple different parts of themselves that what trauma very often does, and the language that the IFS actually uses is exile, that it exiles parts of us into dark corners that can't be seen or heard, or just but they still carry the pain, and they still remember it on this very precognitive somatic level. And so a lot of what I do to try to work at healing from trauma is to rebuild a different relationship with those exiles and reintegrate them back into the whole person, so that the whole person is able to experience life, that life more abundant that Jesus talked about, which is much more than just like, like being super toxically positive and yay, let's, everything is going to be fine. I can just trust Jesus and it'll all turn out. But it's a, it's a, it's an experience of the world that acknowledges that really bad things have happened and there are other truths that are also true, because that's a lot of what trauma does, is it kind of compartmentalizes those truths, so like it's only one or the other at any given time, instead of them both being true together.
Interesting. And I do remember talking to you about like an emotional exile like that.
Yep.
And this is a useful thing also, and it's not necessarily to try to be too esoteric or anything like that, but it is easier, I think, to think about that fragmentation you were talking about with past traumas being something that kind of like separates all of the sub personalities that are there in your emotive responses. Like you aren't like, your body will respond emotively to things.
Yes.
But also your rationality will respond in the context of your emotions.
Right.
And those two things will inform each other. And neither of those things are necessarily reducible to your body, though your body is doing something to respond to it, right? Can you tell me, I guess, just for my own curiosity, and because I think it's relevant to the topic too, is does your body respond emotively first with the chemical releases, or does your rationality respond first?
Body first, very, very much. And so the approach that I take to work at healing is what's called a bottom up. Again, there's that somatic orientation where I'm focusing primarily on the body, because a lot of times, like therapy, especially like talk therapy, is going to kind of go from the top down. Okay, tell me about your thoughts, like cognitive behavioral therapy, and let's understand your thought life and try to, challenge irrational thinking or something like that.
Right.
What I do is I say, rather than say, okay, tell me about your thoughts about that event, it's more like, as you describe that event, tell me how your body responds. Let's notice the ways in which your body holds tension, holds the trauma, contains, and in some cases can't contain that pain. And let's start to notice that from a place of curiosity rather than judgment, and approach that from a place of calm, from a place of compassion, and bringing that kind of response pattern to the pain actually tends to loosen the body, slow down the response, free up, open up, different kind of body responses. And then once the body feels safe, because literally what it's doing is like, I don't want to say tricking, because it's not really tricking. It's really actually bringing your brainstem perception into the the reality. It's like, this situation really is safe in many cases, not in every case, but in many cases, this situation really is safe. It's just that my lizard brain doesn't believe it. And so as a result, my heart's going a mile a minute, my palms are sweating, and my breath is hyperventilating. And so we work at first at, let's get the body into a place of safety and security. And then let's step into either those memories or those triggering realities that exist in the world, because this is not just like, past trauma in terms of like sexual abuse or something like that. It is that, but it's also past trauma in terms of things like, a car accident or PTSD. With I live in a city that has 3 military bases, and so we work with an awful lot of veterans and active duty personnel. And so what we're trying to do is to bring their body into a place where they feel safe first, and that's what neurologically, that's what opens the door, opens the pathway for once that lizard brain is calmed down, opens the pathway for the mammal brain to actually effectively function, which is the part of our brain that is our limbic system that allows us to be able to create connection and be in community and have social relationships and build healthy, tribe that we can feel like we love and belong in. And then once that's taken care of, then we can do our rational faculties.
Right.
So unfortunately, a lot of therapeutic approaches in the traditional kind of cognitive behavioral world tend to go the opposite direction.
Top down. I think that's really actually very cool. And it does tie directly into our topic, because what you're describing this bottom up is really almost the same imagery as an ascension back up the mountain, back into Eden, into the garden, the place where things are, like you said, from the body up to the spirit. So from the bottom up. That's really, I like that a lot.
There's actually a really neat overlap here with like our understanding of how the human mind and our intellect and will are in much the image and likeness of God. And it's our breath, much like God's breath with the spirit, that actually reveals the depth to which we are like God. And there's a psychologist at Butler University up in Indiana, Dr. Laurel, I can't remember her last name, but Spencer, she was talking at an education conference I went to a couple years ago, exactly about what you were describing, and her description of the visceral sigh that letting your shoulders drop is that that lowers your cortisol levels the fastest, and it actually pulls you out of a fight or flight response. And when you're in fight or flight, and this is where that long-term trauma, like you mentioned, shows up, is over time, as these acute traumatic events occur, your cortisol levels will stay trapped in certain parts of your body that aren't completely brought to equilibrium, let's say. And then you have those triggers, and then that cortisol it's almost primed, and then you immediately move into fight or flight.
Yes.
Because that process of breathing then can pull you out of the closer you are to fight or flight, the more likely you are to that animal brain. So that basic brain stem that has the primary function of keeping your lungs and your heart and those adrenaline levels racing. But it leaves you almost incapable of doing rational thought. And that higher level thinking and judgment levels that are unique really to human capacities. So as you stay kind of trapped in trauma, you are really less of yourself, as much as God allows you to be. So then that healing, as Spencer mentioned, as you continue to breathe, and really just a matter of, like, they talk about the 4 square breathing of holding breath or inhaling for 4, holding for 4, exhaling for 4.
I have about a dozen different breathing exercises I do with clients.
And it's amazing how it really
does.
And then you get the clarity of mind, and your body relaxes, and you have the ability to really, it's that self-revelation that is trapped by trauma. And it imitates so much of what we experience through salvation history in ourselves day in and day out.
Well, and what's really, sorry, I'm trying to hold my geeky neuroscience part of me back here, because I just want to dive right into like Stephen Porges' polyvagal theory and Dr. Bruce Perry and the neurosequential model, because everything you're talking about is like flashing all kinds of cool little tie-ins in my brain. But I also realize that will put people way to sleep. But
Well, one of the cool connections that I'm hearing out of both of what you guys are saying is that the body and its responses are contextual, right?
Yes.
And so the space that you're inhabiting, not just locally, but also in time. You can't be in a place where, like you could be in your home and everything be normal. And then all of a sudden somebody brandish a pistol. That is not your home anymore. You're in a different place now. Your body will tell you that you're in a different place now. So it's a space and time together kind of context that creates a space for your body to appropriately respond, and for your, let's say, your rationality, your higher personhood, your consciousness, whatever you want to call that, is able to, in some sense, master over the body and its passions and its responses and so forth. That sounds to me an awful lot like what we would call a sacred space. And the way that it seems to me, long before psychology was a formalized science at all, and we knew anything about the neural pathways of the brains or their development or any such thing, we already had the intuition of mankind to create sacred spaces, especially ones in which we could, like you said, develop unity, develop relationship, healthy tribal relationship, not just, just the familial relationship within the home itself, but a secondary higher home, or maybe even a primary higher home, however you want to parse that out. But it sounds to me like what you guys are talking about ties directly into the way that we see nowadays, let's say, a decline in any kind of sacred space or architecture that could really make a space for you to inhabit what it is you're describing now, where my body and my mind both can respond to the safety and appropriateness of my setting and everything else. All of my senses are not being bombarded, like I'm in a place where I can be in charge of my body and my body not be in charge of me. Dane, you've been real quiet, bro. What do you think?
Well, I've been quiet because it's interesting to listen to these two cats. So I've been liking what they've been saying, and I'm trying to be somewhat quiet since I talked a lot on the first part of this, since it was just you and me. But I definitely agree with everything that's been said so far. The way that our bodies and spirits respond to different contexts, settings, experiences just reminds me that nothing ever happens exclusively to our body, and nothing ever happens exclusively to our spirit. It's going to impact them both one way or another. And what's really interesting is it's going to either produce pain and suffering in both at the same time, or joy and jubilation for both at the same time. But what I've been kind of wondering is it possible that it brings suffering to one and joy to the other? And that's a really interesting dynamic, right? And something that I think about a lot is the world of addiction, because I've shared this. I don't know if I've ever shared this publicly on a live stream, but a lot of y'all know that I have a brother who died from opiate overdoses. And it's interesting because there's a sense in which, at least at the beginning of drug abuse, the body seems to respond with joy. Now, I know there's health effects that come along with it as well, but at least the sensations. And yet the spirit is saying, no, this doesn't feel right. I long for a better high, right? Like I long for the high that comes with being in the presence of the Lord. So my mind was kind of going there. It's like usually a trauma is going to injure your body and your spirit, like a car wreck or sexual abuse, or it's going to be an experience that uplifts your body and your spirit. So, for example, a memorable birthday party, where you got all the gifts that you wanted. But there are, I think, some experiences that may make one feel good and the other feel bad. And
absolutely.
And on the flip side, there's things that make our spirit feel good, but our body feel bad, like taking up your cross daily and following Jesus. So
when you said that, it immediately made me think of the ascetic practices of the early Christian fathers. Just exactly. And I think we have to be careful, because there can be maybe a false connotation that like it's almost a pseudo-Gnostic. Well, you have to punish the body in order to reward the spirit. And I think you said it best first with, what you do for one, you do for the other. And any kind of dissatisfaction or conflict you feel within your flesh as you continue to try to order your passions, so to speak, through these ascetical practices, whether it be fasting or even just like kneeling in uncomfortable positions, in itself, you're directing all of yourself in worship towards God and towards your own personal theosis. So, if there is a discomfort, it's due to a deficit. It's not, well, I'm punishing my body by starving it. It's like, no, I'm making my body consciously aware that it actually hungers for a higher good. And that is painful, but it's not a Gnostic dualism sort of thing.
Yeah, in the Screwtape Letters, C.S. Lewis at one point has his demon, his head demon Screwtape, talking to the tempter demon Wormwood, and he's advising him about how to disrupt the patient's prayer life. And one of the things he says is like, instead of he basically says like, get him to not prostrate himself, to not change his body position, because humans tend to forget that they are, that they are half, I think he calls them half breeds, like with that, material and spiritual, and that what they do with their bodies affects them on the spiritual level. And so it is one of those things, almost a lot like what Paul was talking about uniting Christ to a prostitute. Was like the thing we do with our bodies matters immensely to our identity as spiritual beings.
Yeah, I want to add on to that, Spencer, because I think that's such a great insight that C.S. Lewis brings out. I often go on Saturday nights to the Orthodox Church that's near me, my local Orthodox church, and enjoy their Vespers service. And you stand the whole time. You're standing up. You cannot fall asleep on the priest, because you're standing up. And it changes the way you worship, because it's not as comfortable as sitting in like the theater seating of these mega churches. And the church that I minister at is a Methodist church, and there's a lot of stand up, sit down, and it kind of keeps this flow and rhythm, and puts your body into it, not just your mind into it. And I will say, and I'm not picking on mega churches and like these non-denoms, they might deserve to get picked on. I'm not trying to do that, but when it's theater seating, and the pastor's just on this big stage with this giant rock band, and there's fog machines, and you're drinking a Starbucks latte, your body is telling you, I'm at a concert.
Yeah.
And your body is not saying I'm in a temple or I'm in a church. Your body is saying I'm here for entertainment. Now, maybe your spirit is really at worship. I mean, every individual is going to be different, but the context clues of that space are not, hey, this is sacred space. Hey, this is where heaven meets earth. The context clues of that space are saying, relax, enjoy. The show is about to begin.
Entertainment ahoy.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think this is all really relevant too, the way that it's drawing in to the way a sacred space is set up. And I think that's one of the things that's so bothersome to me. And I know Dane mentioned it last time, and I had mentioned it to you folks and you fellas in the chat, was the world is becoming uglier. It's becoming ugly. Like, people who live in cities are starved for nature so much that they swap out the cell towers for fake trees. Like, we know with the very material of our body, we know that we belong in a walled garden. Like, we know it. That's where we belong. We belong in a place where, like you said, heaven and earth meet. It's like our souls are starved for it. And so we're constantly looking for something that's going to facilitate that transcendent feeling, whether it be sexual escapades or, the entertainment, or let's say affection from our children, or any number of things that give you a taste of home, but never let you stay. Right. Mm-hmm. And they show you that, like you said about the ascetic practices, It's teaching your body and its passions that they are subordinate to the higher thing. They are not the higher thing. They would try for themselves to boast that claim, but they're not the higher thing. And if we're not making our passions subservient to a higher thing, then they're ultimately going to become something like a subpersonality. They're going to become that odd, fragmented, possessive, one-eyed monster that you were describing, Spencer. And it's like, so then in the ancient world, they had ways of curbing this need, let's say. In the way that they did it was ascetic practices. They did it with rituals. They did there was a much bigger emphasis on sacrifice itself, most of the time as an external. And I think what Christianity opened the window for was self-sacrifice rather than external sacrifice for the self. It was the self-sacrificed for the external, that you treat everyone else as more important than yourself, which is a giving of yourself up to something else. And the body of Christ being this thing that's unified, that isn't me, I'm in it, right? And so I have to give myself up to that. I have to sacrifice my idiosyncrasies and personal identity toward that higher unity, the same way that, Spencer, you were talking about all those different fragmented portions of you, your emotions and your rationality and your experiences, and you know, that weird red flag feeling you get from certain smells or places or things like that. All of those things are awakening in yourself an awareness that you don't have this imaginary separation between this and this, right? Like I think that separation has become more real to us in the modern world. And I think that right there is actually not a symptom, but a cause of the ugliness that's developed out of it. So let's move into architecture, right? We were going to talk about architecture. I know that all of us as Christians are aware in Christian history how amazing, you know, some of the projects, these long-standing projects, some of these cathedrals and things like that. There was one that was finished just in I believe it was the 50s or the 60s in Italy, that was being built from before the Reformation, guys. The construction on that project started before the Reformation happened, and it was finished after my mother was born. That is just beyond me as a construction worker. Okay. Like, I work in construction. I work with my hands. I build, I fix. I'm a maintenance guy. I was an electrician. Like, it is so beyond me to think about the preparation, the planning, everything, that all the high level intentionality that would go into making something that ornate with that kind of material, the collaboration that's necessary for that. What in the world would drive humans to do that?
God.
Okay, so God, let's draw that out a little bit.
Something more than just the material.
Yeah.
Well, that's for sure. Because honestly, you could build, like right now, I live in a box. Like, my house is all squares. Everything is just uniform. My cabinets are the same shape as my fridge, is the same shape as my door, is the same shape as my windows, is the same shape of the whole thing. It's all one thing. It's all one kind of thing. It's not a series of things that brings this diversity. It's not a space that I sit in and I feel the awe of something, right? So then what is it? Is it just that emotional regulation that we were aiming at? What is it that we're deriving from, like, or not deriving from? What is it we're deriving the construction or the need of these things? Is it just because it's a development of our own psychology and so forth? I know that the sacrament, or the sacrificial system in the Old Testament and that temple, according to Moses, was modeled after the heavens, right? So is this an inheritance of revelation specifically? Does it tie into our emotions? How far, you know what I mean? Like, how far does this go?
Yeah, I think fundamentally it reveals something that is innate to the human character that is designed by God. I mean, we are in ourselves, as his creations, reflections of his love. And I think in one of the ways in which we are like God, we have in us a desire for self-revelation, and not only that, but I think the pursuit of objective truth. I mean, the whole concept of this channel really is driven out of this inherent gift that God has placed in each and every one of us, and that you guys have so courageously decided to embark on your own. And I think that projects like churches and grand architecture, or even pieces of art of marble sculpting like the Statue of David or the Pieta, where you have this almost otherworldly craftsmanship that is present in its depiction of these events that are all designed to, it's a both and, it's not an either or. It both represents the inherent beauty within the human soul that can be placed into some kind of a medium, whatever it is, that we're skilled at doing. But it all also still points towards the highest possible good in itself, and whatever means that the human mind can perceive it. It's inherent in every world religion of historical merit, and if given enough time, it typically is designed to call forth this. It's an invitation of sorts. We reveal things in ourselves that are designed to reveal the transcendent, and then we want, through that revelation, to be able to reach others to see that same beauty ourselves.
So we have a drive. You're saying that this is a drive that we have shared with one another. When this, what that makes me think too, is it's like you said earlier, trauma makes you not quite yourself. I think maybe, let's say societally, we can't be ourselves if we're disconnected from this access to sacred space. Is what we've done in architecture in the modern world a trauma towards society?
Yes, and it's simultaneously also a response to our own trauma living in this society. It's very much a chicken and an egg kind of thing. It's like, which one is the activator, which one is a responder? Well, the answer is porque no los dos. So yeah, very much yes.
I think that the root of a lot of architecture is around bringing honor to the one it's intended for, or the one it's intended to bring honor to. So the cathedrals were intended to bring honor to God, so they would be shaped like a cross to represent Christ and his passion. They would have a steeple that goes really high because they wanted all the eyes in the town to be able to see it from anywhere in the town, because God is over and above us. And it also was a way of representing how we reach up towards heaven in this place, and heaven reaches down towards us in this place. And there would be beautiful rose windows and stained glass and just beautiful things all around it to show you that this is a special place of beauty, and it reflects the beauty of God. There's an altar right in the center because the body and blood of Christ, that is what is central. And so
iconographic paintings,
paintings,
sculptures.
Yes, it's all to bring honor to God and to reveal his beauty. And then you think about like other architectural styles and who it's supposed to bring honor to. A man who builds a nice house for his family and makes a wraparound porch and paints it beautifully and nice pillars and nice doors, and it's to bring honor to the family. It's a nice place to live. So you look around our culture now and you say, well, these buildings that dominate us, these skyscrapers that dominate us, who are they bringing honor to? Corporations, right? U.S. Bank, AT&T, whatever. I mean, FedEx. But they take these skyscrapers, they make them even taller than the steeples of the churches, and they say, you want to know what lifts you up? It's no longer God, it's corporations. And our culture has become a caricature and a farce of, like a corporate vibe on steroids, right? And we basically have become no longer men and women who pursue after God, but we've become a culture that pursues the almighty dollar, pursues material wealth, pursues creaturely comforts, and basically the American dream is get a job in one of those skyscrapers, make a bunch of money, and then go buy the stuff that they're selling.
Which we become like what we worship, and we worship a God made in our own image. So they really are very much like cathedrals to mammon, essentially.
Yeah. Well, and you think of even little kids, like if you look at kids' artwork, one of the first things a child will do when it's capable of drawing with a crayon in any ordered fashion is they're going to start making pictures left and right. I think there really is an inherent piece of us that desires to represent the reality that is revealed to us through the joy of our parents, our loved ones, and our ecosystem that we find ourselves in. And to kind of call back to what Spencer's background is, a lot of times you can read into little kids' artwork, like whether the kid's got a happy face on, whether they're ordered in a particular way in the family lineup is kind of the traditional little kid picture. Where that kid is on the picture has a lot to say about how they estimate themselves in relation to family members and how they view those family members. I think their work is reflective of the world around them, and maybe they simply lack the technical skill to bring forth that.
That's not just a child thing. One of my favorite techniques that I don't do it all that often because it kind of throws some people off and takes a little bit of like a lot of trust built up first before I break it out. But I have a thing called a sand tray. So it's like this, big box full of sand. And I have 4 different Tupperware containers that have like people, animals, houses, various, figurines and stuff like that. And I'll give them a very open-ended prompt, like build me a sand tray of your marriage. Build me a sand tray of your inner world right now. Which of these animals represents that part of you, and trying to just get that creative experience flowing. And like I said, there's a reason why I don't do it very often, because there's so much just built-in hardwired resistance in the modern world for people to just not be creative because it's not productive.
Well, I think there's also something you had mentioned just a moment ago, Dane, about the way that something that is literally above you makes you look up. You can see it. Anybody could access it from anywhere in the town and look up and say, oh, that's the thing. That's the thing that draws us into unity. Where is it? Right where it belongs, above us, right? And so it matches, like perceptually, it matches the layout of the world. So then like the layout of a cathedral, right? I think when you walk into a cathedral, before you walk in, you walk up to the front of it. The front is very striking. The face of a cathedral is so huge feeling. It's so massive. It would be like if you could take the cosmos and make it into a building and you go, wow, this big thing. Oh, how tiny I am. Very similar feeling for me, right? You look at it and it's just daunting, but also it's inviting. You can't help but look at all of the detail that's right in front of you and say, wow, look at that. I can't believe somebody pulled that off. That's just amazing. And you have this feeling of awe, right? I think what's remarkable too is that when you're on the outside of a cathedral, there are things on the outside that are not on the inside and things on the inside that are not on the outside. And what I mean by that is on the outside, especially on the outer corners, up high, sometimes on cathedrals, there are very odd things, like weird, almost lewd kind of things, sometimes monstrous or gargoyles, right? Monsters. Yeah, exactly. All on the edge, just out on the very boundary, the corners, right? Just watching out over things. People have this immediate gut response, and I've asked people about this. Why do you think gargoyles are chilling on the outside of a cathedral? This weird monster demon looking thing on the outside. Of all places, of all things to put on a cathedral, why in the world would you put a gargoyle, a demon face, on the outside of your cathedrals? And it makes sense thinking about it the way that you would think about the way, okay, in my own mind, when I think about what I know and what I don't know, if I were to go into the woods at midnight, alone, naked, everything is monstrous. Everything is extreme. Everything is the edge of the world. That's what, right? And so it's like, what I build a campfire. Now the edge of the light is what all of that darkness, that confusion, the monstrous, that's where it inhabits. Let's say expand the light out. We have 10 campfires in the community, and the edge of the camp is now that space, right? What's on the outside? It's like, that's what's on the outside. That's what's on the edges, is things that you don't know and can't understand, things that violate your expectation. Monsters, in other words, right? And you look at that and you'd say, okay, then the cathedral being a sacred thing that reflects this space, the right the right environment for me to inhabit, right? Then it should be modeled after that exact same thing. So why on its extremities? Well, that's where the monstrous finds its place. You're not going to just make it disappear, right? It has its place on the outside. If you walked into a church and you found a gargoyle on the altar, it would be a problem, right? But on the outside edge, on the very corner of the building, farthest away from the center, that's where it belongs. Exactly where it belongs. It's an acknowledgement, right? And it's like for
spitting out the waste of the cathedral.
Right, exactly.
Usually they're like spouts, like where the gutters.
They're gutters. Yeah,
so,
exactly.
Yeah.
They're vomiting when it's raining. It's like like you said, it's just this crazy face. It's like those Christians in the modern world now. You begin to talk about anything paranormal, anything to do with darkness or spirits or anything. They're like, whoa, I don't do that stuff, man. I'm a Christian. I go to church. Like, as if that. What? Like, you don't think there's any place for that? Like, you don't believe there's a Satan? You don't believe there are demons? What was Jesus doing? What were the apostles doing? He sent them out. Like, what? That was just fun. They were going to lunch. Like, no, I think we can't pretend away the other side of things, right?
No, so, and a lot of these older structures that you've mentioned, the interior reflects the proper ordering of things. Like the icons or stained glass imagery of Saint Michael holding, the Satan underfoot, or the depictions of Mary, the mother of Christ, trampling the serpent underfoot, or seeing what was the other one? Oh, like depictions of Jesus exorcising demons, like spirits being like pouring out of a person's mouth, like the water from the gargoyles outside. It's in the artwork inside these churches.
Yeah, the church in recent years really made a mistake by buying into a lot of the materialistic assumptions of the modern world, and we're going to have to undo a lot of that damage that we did. But Josh is absolutely right that if you talk about demonology and angelology in our churches today, especially our mainline Protestant churches, people will get a little bit weirded out. Like I'll tell people at my congregation that they shouldn't do yoga because it might let demons in, and they look at me like I just said the weirdest thing. Well, that wouldn't have even been a strange thing to say a few hundred years ago. But now people say, well, yoga is just it's just a physical exercise. It's just a physical routine to keep your body healthy. And it's like, no, it's actually a spiritual practice. It's poses that you're doing in honor of false gods. And when someone says yoga is merely physical, it's merely just for exercise, I say that's like saying communion is merely a snack. I'm just taking the bread for a snack. No, there's something spiritual going on here. And so we do need to be very diligent in reminding people and re-educating people in our churches that there's a visible and an invisible realm. There's a material and a spiritual reality, and they're not separate and they're not severed, but they're always together. And they're both good when they're in line with holiness, right? God calls both the body and the soul good, but both body and soul can also be used in unholy ways. So it's all about who you're serving and what you're doing. But yeah, Jesus was literally casting out demons. It was one of the biggest parts of his ministry, in fact. Go read through the Gospel of Mark, and it's exorcism here, exorcism there, driving demons into pigs. I mean, like, this is real stuff.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and it also, matters very much like what your point of attention is when you're worshiping in a cathedral, which I mean, the architecture of it is designed to kind of draw, just like art, like good art will draw your eye through perspective, through shadow, through those kind of things to a certain point in the picture. The same thing is true, when you walk into a church, and it's like, what is the focal point of this place? What do they think is at the center? What do they think is most important? What is their primary thing they want you to pay attention to, both when you walk in the door and when you're standing there worshiping or sitting there worshiping? And I mean, I always want to be really, really cautious, because I'm not at all trying to like knock any of my brothers and sisters in Christ. And I mean, I go to still a very evangelical Protestant church, and like they have, a traditional stage, evangelical Protestant, stage experience. And there are two large screens kind of on either side. And the way that they've chosen to do that is to kind of show film of the performers as they're standing there on stage. And again, I want to be very careful, because I know that their hearts are in the right place and they're worshiping to the best of their ability with the tools that they have. So this is not a criticism. It's just an observation of, I get one kind of experience when I walk in there and I see very large screens drawing my attention to people while worship is occurring. Versus, I always wonder, how would the experience be different if those two large screens were iconography or images of just nature? Like you talked about awe, Josh, and just the like things that encourage awe, things that induce awe, things that make me want to kind of prostrate myself, not
For
to worship
example,
that thing, but because I notice what that thing is pointing toward.
For example, check this out.
Yes.
This right here is something that I wanted to have queued up, because out of all the pictures that I had reviewed, this is one of those things that reminded me of how nature is a reflection of God's own creativity and ability to create things that we can perceive not only as unities, but just absolutely awe-inspiring beautiful. And when we say, there's a phenomena that when we notice things, our mind is designed and our eyes are designed to notice patterns, and we fill patterns in when we see things, called pareidolia. I see a door, right? Through the door, I see a light. Above it, I see the reaches of heaven. I see the contrast of colors. But the picture, because it was taken by a person with a perspective, is pointed toward the thing that shines forth and draws your attention, like you said. So if the beach was a cathedral and this was what you were looking at, it makes sense that it draws your eye right there to that window of light, that window of heaven, right? And that's kind of what we're talking about now, is that, like I had mentioned before, the thing that's on the outside, on the extreme furthest places from the center, is that the monstrous, the stuff that violates your expectation and so forth. So then what's in the very center is the thing that draws unity and makes things ordered, the thing that makes sense of everything else. That the reason why there is a margin is because there is a center, right? So what's in the center? Traditionally, in the highest place in the center, not only of the cathedral, but the community, was what Dane said before, was the steeple, the cross above everything. This is the signifier. This demarcates our unity, and this is the thing that we can all look toward, even the king, right? This is above everybody and everything, right? And then below it, inside the church, the center was not a podium, not a screen, not a guitar. It was an altar, right? And I think, and this is something that came up in the comments just now. Dally asked, what is it we have lost that we no longer build churches that represent our awe of God? Perhaps what we lost was the awe of God. Perhaps what we lost was the thing that was meant to be the reason why you're here. The reason you go to church is not for coffee and donuts in the lobby afterward. The reason you go to church is not to sit with your favorite friends in the right row that you always sit in, that row, yeah, if somebody sat there, it would throw your whole day off, right? That's not why you're here. You're not here because you have a liking necessarily of all the people in the community that you're meeting with there. You're not there necessarily even to hear the lecture of your own pastor, to teach you about the scholastic use of your scriptures and how these things can have reflective use and discipline and all of these remarkably deep things. You're not there for the music, right? You were there to receive a feeding from the table of the Lord and to receive Christ life. That's why you were there. And you did that together. You weren't there for the together as much as you were for the serving at the table, which makes you together, right? Mm-hmm. And so when we removed the altar from the center and replaced it with the podium of scholasticism, I think in that we tried to trade mystery for a satisfied sense of certainty, creating systems, dogmas and stuff, making propositional thinking about the list of things that I need to say yes to as the center focus of what you're doing at church.
Rather than the life I need to participate in.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. I think that
you
was
hit it on the head there, Josh, that certainty. And we see this reflected in people as well. And this is, I want to be careful with it because I know there's a lot of cultural baggage that goes on to conversations about modesty. But understood properly, in a sense, modesty functions as a virtue of orienting the light of the eyes towards the true value of a person in such a manner. Like, you can have tasteful, modest clothing that accentuates beauty, but it doesn't limit it to beauty in a purely like sexually representative way. You know, so I give an example of something of like a dress on a beautiful woman. It can accentuate her naturally God-given curves, absolutely, but the dress fails to reach the revelation of her highest good if all that it accentuates is those particular things. And I think in some manner that's present in the churches too, is like we want to focus on what's the one thing that if the people didn't stick around long enough to notice anything else, what's the one thing we could show them? And then they strip everything else down out of the hopes that like we have to be certain they get this one thing, whatever it is. And then we end up with a complete loss of things. It would be the equivalent to like cutting down an entire forest that surrounded this beautiful lake and just razing it to the ground, and all you have left is the lake. It's like, yeah, you're certain you got the lake, you know, but now there's no longer an appreciation or anticipation of that deeper value that's present with the thing. And I think so much now, like our clothing for both men and for women, it's, well, what's the certainty I want to have there? It's reflective even in like our culture of pornography. It's like, well, there's just no mystery anymore. You know, you're a fast forward away from the certainty of the thing that you had desired, as opposed to this process of revelation and knowledge of the interior good present in a person that would otherwise, have been hidden.
And I think the seed of that is probably like this, let's say, theologically flattening of a hierarchy in which God is the most high. And there's, let's say, principles of emanation where God makes himself known through other things. And those things are both revelation and a buffering to keep you alive, because to see the face of God naked would kill you. And so he needs to present himself to you so that he can make himself obvious. Romans 1, he's made himself obvious through creation, through our ability to perceive, that we can perceive unity. We see beauty in the earth. We see these things, right? When we decided, let's say theologically, primarily I think in the Protestant world, that we wanted to flatten out the hierarchy so that there was God up here and literally everything else down here in equality, just this muddled thing. Everything, we took the hierarchy and made a puddle and said, now we need a gap between me and God, but it's an empty gap. We cut all the trees down. We paved paradise and put up a parking lot, right? So that flattening of a hierarchy, so that there was no longer this, let's say, ontological height of reality, where there wasn't saints, there wasn't angels, there wasn't, prophets. There's this mediation between God and me, right? When I flatten that mediation, what I do also is take away, like you said, anything else that might be, to me, I'm afraid of the distraction. To God, those were all part of the revelation. Like the veil in the temple wasn't just there to separate you from the inside. It was part of the temple, right? Like it wasn't just this arbitrary blanket that was placed in between.
It's not like God's spirit is held back by fabric.
Right, exactly. But it was there, for a reason. That's like when you're on the outside, let's say you're on the outside in the camp, let's say you're an Israelite, right? As we play pretend time for a moment. I'm an Israelite. I'm outside of the tabernacle, the tent. I'm in my city, where the city is actually a bunch of tents because we're all still nomads in the wilderness, right? It's like you're on the outside. There are barriers now between you and the outer court, between you and the inner area, between you and the holy place, between you and the most holy place. And then ultimately what's above and inside of that sacred container, the ark, right? Like all of those layers between you and God. And yet you're inside the camp of Israel. You have God in your midst. God is among us, right? And so all of those layers were not just there to keep you out, right? All of those layers weren't just arbitrary interruptions between you and God. They were there in illustration of the necessary function of passing one place into another, and your body and your mind needing to respond appropriately to that. That you don't just walk willy-nilly from the outside of the camp right into the most holy place with the ark and just die, right? Like you need to be consecrated. You need to move appropriately into the presence of God. And I don't think that we have an appropriate understanding of this approach toward God. This is one of the reasons why nobody hate me for this. One of the reasons I still like my Calvinist friends. They make such an emphasis on the holiness and purity and sovereignty of God, to be like, look, you little worm, you better watch it, right? Like, I think that emphasis was necessary because of this flattening. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think that's even inherent in Revelation itself. Like I think I mentioned this before in a conversation with you, Josh, that Saint Irenaeus quote that Christ himself gave humanity a gift in hiding the face of the Father, that man might not hold God in contempt. And there is no iconography of the Father, and appropriately so, because Jesus is the icon of the Father. No one comes to the Father except through me. And it is that it makes me think of that Isaiah vision he has when he's transported to the temple, and he knows he's not supposed to be in the Holy of Holies because he's unclean. And the angel sears his lips with the coal, and it purifies him.
Makes atonement.
Yeah.
Sorry, I couldn't help myself.
Your sins have been purified. And yeah, your sins have been atoned for. And that's what Jesus does in the New Testament. Every time he touches an impure person, he brings forth purity to them, instead of him being made unclean.
He's not contaminated. He does the cleansing. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Which, if anyone's interested, Matthew Thiessen's work, Jesus and the Forces of Death, is an excellent book that fleshes that theme out a lot more. But, I mean, at the end of the day, the answer to Daly's question there is, historically at least, the Protestant Reformation. And the iconoclasm that primarily happened. And of course, I'm oversimplifying quite a bit drastically. But that's the point at which we see a hard shift in the beauty of church life, which is why, like, the Puritans, like their major emphasis was on complete asceticism, like, wool shifts and drab colors and nothing frilly or fancy at all. And I'm not saying, again, just like, we need our Calvinist brothers and sisters, we need our Puritan brothers and sisters. So it's not at all, and we need our Protestant brothers and sisters. I continue to be in communion in a Protestant church. And so it's not at all like that's where it all went wrong. It's just to simply say, historically speaking, that's been the trajectory.
Yeah, and I think that's present on the maybe more, I don't know, we call traditionalist side. There's a temptation in Catholic and Orthodox and Anglican and Episcopal circles to reduce the beauty of the world to action in the world, like an overemphasis on the social justice. Like, and we see this, like, there's almost and material. Yeah, Jesus is not. It's not that they don't reduce him out of his divinity, but they think his divinity is only served to bring about order and justice in the world, not to call us to a new world. And it ends up being this reduction of Christianity to just the social justice movement as enforced by Jesus as like the chief supervisor of social justice. And that sort of mentality often gets the criticism as like, why do you put so much money into building these ornate structures when you could be feeding the poor with that money? And it's not that they don't have a point that we should be taking care of the poor. Christ himself is like, enjoy me while you always have the poor with you. But on the other hand, to limit it to that is to rob us of that transcendent component that Christ calls us forth to new life. Because at the end of the day, objectively speaking, regardless of how many poor or people have died over the course of time, the resurrection is coming. I mean, the parousia is inevitable. And it's not to say that we shouldn't seek to create justice in the world and to better our common man and to call them forth out of trauma into this eternal communion with God and with neighbor. But to limit it to such, I think, is just as harmful as maybe the iconoclastic elements too.
Yeah, I actually want to make some comments on both what Nicholas and Spencer have just said. I'll start with what Nicholas just said since it was more recent. The social justice movement in the church, it is almost like a modern day version of the Zealots who wanted to go overthrow Rome and bring in the Messianic kingdom that way. Now, I'm not saying that they're violent or trying to overthrow the government with violence, but I go to some of these churches. I'm friends with a lot of these colleagues of mine who are very much bent towards the social justice stuff. And when they preach, it has a lot to do with call your senator and call your representative. And this is what you should be doing in the voting booth. And these are the policies that we should be endorsing. And I'm not saying there's not ever a time and place for that, but the time and place for that isn't the worship service on Sunday morning. That's a time to be focusing on the kingdom which is not of this world, the kingdom which is still yet to be fully realized. And we're supposed to have all our focus on consuming the body and blood of Christ and singing the praises of him as our king. And so I do think a lot of our friends who are stuck in that social justice only kind of mindset, it is materialistic. It's like, this is the world we've got. This is it. And we need to make it the best it can be. And, maybe they'll give some kind of, lip service to eternal life. But really what they're focused on is just the here and now. And they never step out of it and say, there's going to be a day of judgment. There's going to be a physical resurrection. My spirit will go on in immortality to be with the Lord in heaven. Their mind isn't so focused on that. And then this is totally shifting topics, but I also wanted to say something, remark on something Spencer said about a lot of our beauty and image and symbolism and all these things were kind of tamped down during the Protestant Reformation. My Methodist tradition still has a lot of high church elements to it, and yet a lot of people don't know what in the world they mean or why we do them or what they are. So, for example, during one of my services on Sunday, it's our traditional service. I wear the robes and the pastoral stole when I preach, and most people just think it looks nice, I think. It sort of looks cool or whatever, you know. Our preacher looks like a wizard. That's cool. But there's actually a reason we have the stole. It represents that oil which ran down on Aaron, right? It's the drippings of the oil, and it's showing that we are priests and servants of God in a similar way that Aaron was. There's a reason that we put purple, green, red, or white paraments, the cloth coverings over a pulpit and over the altar table. It's each one symbolizes a certain season we're in, and it reminds us Christ has not just conquered the grave, he's conquered the calendar, he's conquered time. All of time points to Jesus, and these different seasons of the church remind us of that. And it's like, this is why it's so important that we as Christians maintain BC and AD. Like, we got to not let the academics take us into this CE, BCE stuff. It's like Christ is Lord of time. He's the grave conqueror, and he's the conqueror of all time and all space as well. And those paraments remind us he controls our cycles, our rhythms, our patterns of time. So the symbolism in a lot of Protestant churches is actually still there. Just nobody knows why it's there. And for some reason, and I'll point the finger at myself first because I'm in a teaching position, we haven't done a good enough job teaching it and demonstrating it. But the symbolism is rich. And then there are Protestant churches that have completely dismissed all symbolism, have become very iconoclastic, and they've almost become a caricature of iconoclasm where their pastor wears jeans and a t-shirt and, a gold chain and is just like, hey, bruh, I'm here to give you the word today. And it's like, okay, the symbolism here is that my pastor is just my buddy, right?
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah.
The inverse of that is what I work with spiritual trauma and spiritual abuse, where, like, when you were talking, Josh, about how there used to be this kind of hierarchy within the church structure, and then it kind of all got flattened. It made me think of how, like, we start to kind of, we really crave that. We really crave that hierarchy. We really crave that ordering. And if we have a world that's built like this, then we start trying to create this our own way, doing our own little re-inhabiting of the garden. And we see that an awful lot with a lot of these churches that have now kind of developed into like cults of personality and have created some very abusive systems. And that's, I think, in large part, a craving that people have to be able to look for that ordering, that hierarchy, that structure. But since we live in a world that's like this, it's like we don't have it. So we have to kind of find it where we can, either or make it, or we just wind up where even the guy in the pulpit is down here with me. One of the two.
I think you're on to something there, Spencer, and great points to you too, Dane. I do think there's a misplacement as to what consecrates the world to God, in a sense of like, okay, so, regardless of the many different situations we've just described in different churches, the question of, well, is it our service to the poor that consecrates the world? Is it the word of God professed faithfully and truthfully and passionately from the pulpit that consecrates the world? Is it is it these works of justice and being in the right political party and bringing about like the second coming of Christendom that consecrates the world to God? And I think, frankly, all of these things are aberrations of the order that is initially present in these beautiful structures. Like, it's the blood of Christ made present on the altar that consecrates the world. It is the liturgy in itself that brings it forth. And our prayer throughout the day is a matter of ordering ourselves towards that goal. And so I really think, and you said it, Dane, our inability to properly catechize the importance of liturgy in itself. And I think we see this in an example from Scripture when it's not which of the Jewish kings, it might have been Josiah, has all of the effigies of the pagan gods burned. as he cleanses out the space for the temple, and they enjoy this period of rebirth and rejuvenation in the southern kingdom as the Assyrians are breathing down their necks. And it's heavily implied in the scriptures that the only reason the South survives is because they get right their order with God again through their ritual worship that he called them forth to. Now, again, of course, that'll fall to pieces again and see it end with Hezekiah. But I think in the world, to bring this back to one of Josh's original points, is that society in itself is a reflection of this aberration of like, what is it that brings about consecration of a person in society? And it's no longer called consecration. It's like self-actualization. It's that fulfillment of the American dream or my personal well-beings. And it really is, in many ways, just a thinly veiled hedonism that's fed through corporations oftentimes. Like, well, you'll bring about the transformation of the world and make a name for yourself if you buy this, if you own this, if you work this way, if you make these sacrifices to these altars of concrete and steel, that brings about your deification, and it always falls short.
I think what I'm gathering from what we've established so far is that these buffering layers between you and divinity are in fact pretty much what we mean by seeing a beauty that reflects God in the world in front of you. And if you take those away, you equally take away the beauty, right? So by trying to flatten things out so that I have direct, unfettered access to God, and no more do I need all these ornate distractions around me that we call the cathedral and the temple. I'm gonna truncate everything down, like we were saying earlier, to strip it down, right? And just for a point of reference, I actually have. This is a very interesting picture. This is a very standard, run-of-the-mill Protestant church stage area right now. Can you guys tell me what is the center? I see a guitar. I see a series of colored lights. I see, I see something that's supposed to be like a synthetic mirroring of beauty, of structure, right? It seems to have some of the elements, but not any of the main elements that would draw you into unity with Christ. Nothing in this picture says Christ to me.
Well, and Josh, this type of beauty, there is beauty to it. It's symmetrical. It's got the lighting, but this type of beauty is not the type of beauty that inspires awe and worship. It's the type of beauty that a teenage boy wants in his bedroom, like neon lights and black lights and the lava lamp. Like it's that kind of beauty, in my opinion. What you just put up there is one of my favorite places in the world. It's Saint Chapelle in Paris, France. This is a type of beauty that I think does inspire the heart for worshiping God at a deeper level. And it is also symmetrical. There's also the candlelight. There's also the natural light coming in from the stained glass. There's also the roof just being really, really high, which makes you feel small and yet still connected to that which is above you. But I really like the light. It's real light. It's not artificial. Yeah. It's real light. The other one you were showing was artificial light. So anyway,
yeah,
those are some of my thoughts on that.
I was going to say it also draws me. This beautiful picture in front of me with the candles and the stands and even the floor is marked with something that draws your attention forward toward the center there. I don't see a guitar in sight. I don't see anything that has anything to do with drawing me. There's no seats that I can see that are there to try to point me in the front of the room toward a lecturer. It looks to me actually like the ceiling is meant to be a reflection of something like a canopy, and these pillars are meant to be almost like the trunks of a tree. I feel like I'm in a forest almost, but a forest made of stone that's meant to reflect. And then these lights are not actually just light. They're colored, they're patterned. There's actually things going, there's texture and stuff going on in the windows that actually draw out your attention and point you also upward, right? Toward the ceiling. It's like everything in the room makes you want to be small, but look up. Like you said, it kind of draws your attention toward a particular thing. Like it makes you, I'm reminded of the experience I had when I got to go to a liturgy for my 10th anniversary with my wife. I visited an Orthodox parish near where I live. And even though the building was very small, and it's an A-frame, and it used to be some other kind, it was probably a Baptist church or something in the past. They had taken it and made the space what they could. They made the space into something that was more reflective of this kind of upward push and beauty that brought your attention out of this mundane, I drove my car here, I have a radio, oh, I'm going to silence my cell phone. All of a sudden you walk in and you just went through a time portal into the 2nd century, and you are now inhabiting the story, right? You're no longer just reading about the story in the Bible. It feels as though you just walked into the story, right? And so you have this experience of, I'm being drawn in to the space that the narrative I'm reading is trying to portray. I am now in the same space as the narrative, and I get to participate in the narrative by being here, right? But one thing that I wanted to get to just before we move on or go too much deeper into that is Real Seekers Dale has a question for us. He said, for the panel, I've listened to a lot about what you guys think Protestants are missing, but you all go to Protestant churches. Well, Nicholas doesn't, but do you think they have something worship-wise that others might be missing? For me, the first thing that I can think of, being somebody who participates in the worship team at my church, is, let's say, a more relatable, like immediate kind of music involvement for not just the preferences of a person, because I don't think that that's what's most important, but that this is directly relevant because it maps onto my experience, right? In the way that a large organ would be the way that, like, imagine in the ancient world when they had cathedrals, it's not like you could go home and have a band play music in your house unless you were insanely wealthy. And now I have access to thousands of kinds of music. I can play it from this little box in my pocket. I can play it from the laptop that I'm using to stream this with right now. And I have access to music in a way that most people never would have and never could have. And so the music has shifted. It's become a lot less formalized. And it seems like the emphasis on the freedom of expressing myself in the worship seems to be something that draws me in personally, because I get to participate in that as one of the people that's presenting the music. It allows me to participate in something where I'm less, because I've done rock shows. I'm a drummer. I've played rock shows. I've played live. I've played at parks. I've played on stages in gymnasiums. I've played in a bar. I've played many different places. But playing at church is not the same thing as playing in a rock show. And I think that's probably largely because my pastor wants to put the emphasis and the focus in the right direction so much as possible. But also it allows me to take the focus off myself and use my drumming not as a gratification for my own talents or a look at me kind of thing. To be honest with you, as soon as I'm done drumming, I step off the stage while they're praying and I walk off onto the side stage and I get on my knees. I don't belong on a stage during a prayer. It's not my place, right? So I remove myself. They turn the stage light off as soon as I get off. They're very responsive with this because they know that I do it every single time. That is a ritual that I do to remove myself from that center stage. But what it allows me to do is be something like a conveyor belt, that I get to bring what it is God's bringing through to and through me toward other people in a way that's very much like delivering, not a sacrament, but something similar. So I think that what we're doing is we see these shadows of what it is that we're talking about missing. I think those shadows are still in some sense present. What do you guys think?
The specific niche in spiritual abuse and trauma that I work with is with people who have been hurt by the church, but who nevertheless still feel a connection to the church and don't want to leave and still feel connected to God, and in many ways kind of miss that. And so a lot of what we work on is trying to, like, almost in some ways, like, go through a grieving process of that old maybe perhaps a little bit more innocent, perhaps a little bit less boundary type of existence that they were in before, and trying to create a new reality with God out of that. And very often it does tend to, and not just with my clients, but like with the culture at large, it does tend to kind of go in more like liturgical directions, like with like more high church directions. But that's not always the case. And I work with many, many clients who actually just deeply miss that spontaneity, the emotional connection. And I know very often that gets kind of poo-pooed as like, oh, it's just emotion. But hey, this is my world, so back off. And but the and again, it matters. We have to be integrated whole human beings, not just, robots. And I'm displaying my Protestant bias here. Robots chanting, in little monotones up and down the scale. Like, it's need to be fully immersed individuals. And there's something about the freedom. I think you said that word, Josh. There's something about the spontaneity. There's something about the individual attachment and the community as well. It's not just like, just me and Jesus here, singing my love song to Jesus. It's the everybody. And I myself, I mean, for all of my slight uh, different, or not slight, but for all of my differences with my Protestant brethren, it has been, I myself continue to go, A, because I want to love them, and from the inside, not from the outside, and B, because I still get something out of it, because that still speaks to me as a whole embodied person, body, spirit, heart, mind, everything. And so I think there's an awful lot of good that is there. So kind of like the Orthodox Church sometimes says, like, we know the Spirit is working in the church and the Orthodox Church. We don't know where else He is working, and I really do think that there is a work of the Spirit in Protestantism.
Yeah, I think that Protestantism has a lot to offer Christendom as a whole. I'm a very ecumenical person. I believe that Orthodox, Catholic, Protestant are all saved. It's, in my opinion, it's about faith in the triune God and the resurrection of Christ and these things that connect us. But some things that I think Protestants offer to the Christian world that is helpful is long sermons. I think that long sermons are important. There are not very many places where people just hear one person speak about important things for 30 minutes plus, 45 minutes plus, sometimes even an hour plus. Students at the level of higher education, college and beyond, they get that from their professors sometimes, but it's very, very rare in our world that somebody just sits down and listens to someone talk about deep and important things for an hour straight. When I do visit the Orthodox Church, the priest, if he gives a sermon, it's like 8 minutes long. And Nick, you can probably talk more about the Catholic side, but I think their homilies are often a lot shorter as well. So,
Depends on the priest. Yeah. And honestly, I don't know where you live, Dane, but I would love for you to come visit Mass at St. John Daylight here in Evansville. Our pastor, Father Chris Forler, is he has kind of a similar charism in that same, like, his homilies are routinely 15 minutes plus. And I know it drives some people nuts, but he usually is really well intentioned and very particular about what he puts in each and every time, connecting well, first of all, in itself, like breaking open the scriptures to those who are less catechized. Like, that's that's mission goal number one, present in the liturgy of the word. But the connecting it to life in a way that's not just like, oh, that was nice, but really, like, it has something to offer to you now. And often he contains it as a form of a challenge. Like, this is what you ought to be trying to do this week, coming forth until you come back next Sunday. And I do think I've had a real heart for ecumenism myself since I was about 17 years old. And I think a lot of what I've seen from Protestant churches that we Catholics could learn from is hospitality. like the warm welcome of just like you're glad somebody else is here, and you don't take it for granted. And it's not like the coffee in the lobby, and it's not the warm lighting or this, like it's literally it's the charism of the church that's present oftentimes, where the people are just overjoyed that they're gathering together in common for this one thing, and there's a new face and they're like, yeah, I'm glad you're here. I talk about it in some of my friends circles, is like, there's a really good way to gauge Catholic hospitality is you look at the pews, and if there's people on the outside but nobody on the inside, that means you've got pew guarders, and they're not. It's a symptom. I think they're probably not even doing it intentionally, but I think there's oftentimes like well, this is my spot because I've been here for whatever long. It's like, what does that matter? Like, yeah, you've got somewhere else to be, maybe at the end, but at least like get up and wait in the back and come in late, whatever it is that, makes it fit. But I do think it reaches that visual symbolism when people walk into a Catholic church and they see, they're like, oh, I got to cut in front of this guy to get a spot. Like, that's not very hospitable. Like, your nervous system knows, even if you don't have that cogent thought show up. But I think the other bit too is that I appreciate is, and this is not in any way really a criticism on the Catholic. I think it's more of an issue in catechesis on our part. Of it's very obvious the Spirit is present in Protestant liturgy, and it's not that the Catholic Church it shouldn't. I think to a well-catechized Catholic, it is obvious the Spirit is present in the liturgy, and it's several parts, especially in the people. All of the Catholic calisthenics, as people like to jokingly call them, the sit, stand, kneel processes, like it's very intentional. When we're standing, we're walking together towards the eschatological east, towards the New Jerusalem. And then, when we're sitting, we're in a posture of reception, and usually we're hearing the word of God spoken to us, or we're receiving our invitation to move towards the table of the Lord. And then when we're on our knees, it's a posture of prostration and worship that has an additional depth to it. Not that we aren't worshiping the whole time, but there's that special character present to it. And one of my favorite things at our church is we have a communion rail. So when we go up to receive the body of Christ, we're on our knees. We'll walk up and advance towards the eschatological Jerusalem. As we approach the Lamb's table, we kneel ourselves before the Lord and receive him humbly, that we might be one in his mystical body. So I'd say those are my big things. I wish we would see more overt hospitality from many Catholic churches, and more of that return to a well-catechized reverence throughout our liturgies.
And that community and hospitality is the number one thing far and away that all of my people who I work with who have gone through spiritual abuse, they all say they miss. That's easily far and away the number one thing, because we as humans are built for community and built for genuine, deep relationships, just like we're built for awe.
So all the things that we listed, enumerated that the Protestant church seems to have lost or minimized or made a reductionistic replacement for, what I think was really the emergence of that movement was actually like you just said, and well, you didn't say it this way, but you just said this heightened emphasis on the importance of the individual, right? We lost a lot of the communal thing in doing so. And so I think what needs to happen is a reunifying of the importance of the communal and the corporate aspect of the body, right? But also not to the neglect of the fact that these individual parts have their place. And sometimes when, let's say, if I hurt my toe, I'm going to give it preferential attention. That's what you do to the hurt pieces of a body. You give it preferential attention, and you try to use the tools that are present in the rest of the body to heal. The energy is focused on healing that hurt part, right? And so it's like we've gone to extremes in many different ways. Let's say perhaps there was this lapse of importance of the individual and it became too corporatized, which is, I think, what's happening in larger, more conglomerate mega churches. You get lost. You cease being an individual, but you don't become part of a body. And that's why people just show up and disappear, right? And I think that kind of puts a guard up between you and actually participating in that way. But it seems like the importance of the individual emerged out of that. That certainly can be seen as a positive, as a plus. So I think that's probably, the mainstay benefit, let's say, of what's come out of the Protestant and the fragmentation is this emphasis on the individual. But I think without losing that emphasis, how do we get back to the communal thing? And I think often we're not looking in the right direction because we try to focus on doctrinal agreement or disagreement rather than focusing on what it is that was removed or truncated in order to reach that emphasis of the individual. What if we started re-emphasizing, let's say, the prominent place of the Eucharist in the church? What if we started re-emphasizing the need for beauty in sacred spaces? What if we started re-emphasizing the fact that beauty and our interaction within it reminds us, and our vessel, our body and our mind, both get to remember that our proper place is in a garden, but a walled garden. It's society and nature all at the same time. What if that's the right place to inhabit, right? This reminds me of another picture that I found in my scouring of the internet to try to find beautiful things that were striking to me. One of them was a house that had become dilapidated, began to fall apart and fragment, and yet in it is markings of life, growth, and what I would say is strikingly beautiful, but almost in a haunting sort of way, right? Sometimes life is like that. Sometimes beauty's like that. And still, I'm drawn in. I look at this picture and I see that there was design. There was markings on the wall. There's the ornate banister for the stairway. The stairs themselves are floating in the middle of the air. There's no structural beam supports from under them. They're very well crafted. And yet, this place is abandoned and falling apart. It's an empty shell. But something's taken up residence there. And it's like this growing, self-breeding thing, right? It's like, is this what, perhaps this is a picture, the reason why it's striking to me is this is a picture of perhaps where we are. New growth is starting to come out. The beauty is there, but it's old and worn, and we don't know what to do with it, right? We're afraid to rebuild. We're afraid to undergo making something beautiful again, right? And so we leave it. It becomes dilapidated. We don't know what to add to it, you know? And so it's like, what do we do now? Like, what's the, like this, I think this is a part of the conversation. We're at an hour and 40 minutes, let's say. Let's go to the what now. Like, what do we do about this, guys?
So, Josh, I'm about to drop a preacher bomb on everybody here. Y'all
do
ready?
it.
We got to die. We got to die. You know what that image was? It was death and resurrection. Something died so that a new life could be born out of it. And we're going to have to die to ourselves. We're going to have to die to this need for doctrinal unity to the most granular level. It's like, if you're not pre-mill, then get out of my church. And it's like, wait. Well, that's not an essential of the faith, right? We're going to have to die to that arrogance of you have to believe every single thing the way I believe it. We're going to have to die to the idea that people are just going to come to our church because it's culturally what they're supposed to do. And we're going to have to start being reborn as we go out, into the world. There's all sorts of things we're going to have to die to. We're going to have to die to a lot of old ways, and we're going to have to die to our sin. God is going to fight for us when our camp is purified. I've preached on this before, and it's powerful to me. Achan's sin, right? The reason God didn't give them victory the first time they went after Ai was because there was sin in the camp. And until they dealt with it, they couldn't defeat Ai, right? The church is the same way. We are constantly talking about the world's sin when we haven't even purified our own sin. We're constantly pointing the finger at the ungodly out there when we don't even point the finger at ourselves and say, what are my pet sins that I've been feeding over this past week? And I'm preaching to myself first and foremost. I'm very guilty of this, right? It's a lot easier to say, look at how sinful the world is. But what we need to do is say, how sinful is the church, right? So we have to die in order to be reborn. And the reason you saw that image there as both beautiful and also haunting is the same reason we see Good Friday as both beautiful and haunting. It's one of the most beautiful worship services of the entire year, and yet Christ dies in that worship service, and it haunts us to the bone. And yet we say there's beauty in his death, there's beauty in his blood, there's beauty in his sacrifice. And the reason is because we know the end of the story, that he rises from the dead. So that's my answer. We got to die in order that we might rise again.
Speaking of haunting beauty, I found another thing that kind of reminds me of, let's say, if we started to put our aim back toward, away from relevance and entertainment and back toward excellence, right? This is another picture that I found that I was very striking. This is made of stone, guys.
Mm-hmm.
This was crafted by a man. This was made of stone. That is not a veil over someone's face. That is not a woman. That is a rock. Good heavens. Excellence, right? Like, you can see this was not done on accident. There was a high level of intent there. There was skill. There was massive amounts of time, detail, orientation. It's amazing. To Nicholas's point about why not feed the poor? Why make this ornate project that takes 600 years to build and hundreds of men? Why? Because there's something to be said about the achieving of excellence, especially in relation to its offering up toward the Most High. Like, I think that excellence finds its place. Art can really find its place, not just in function, not just in form, but in sacrifice also. Like, that's why I'm in love with drumming at church. It's not because I get to be a drummer there. That's the only place I don't get to be a drummer. I can be a drummer wherever I want, except in church. And yet that's the place where I'm playing drums. And for me, I'm offering that skill, that art up to God, and through it, that's why I was considering it a conveyor belt, right? When I go to the counter and I bring all of the things in my shopping cart up and I put it on the conveyor belt, I'm not handing them one by one to the person there, right? I'm putting them on the conveyor belt, and the conveyor belt is bringing them right to that person, right? It's from me to them. This is just a tool to deliver what's necessary, right? And I get to be that tool. I get to perform that function and to bring excellence to something. And the people that are around us respond to that. They actually respond to that in a very deep way. I've seen people, weirdly enough, songs that are really lively, in which I get a section where it's not a drum solo, but something comparable. You know what I mean? Where the rest of the music dies away and I'm maintaining just the rhythm and the beat. I'm like layering, right? And then everything drops back in at the once. We have this unity, and everybody all at once feels it in their chest, and the tears well up in their faces. They come up afterward and they're like, that was amazing. And I'm like, you don't even, I syncopated rhythms. No, it's not. No, it's not. That's not what they were reacting to. That's not what they were experiencing. It's not the syncopated rhythm. That's what my hands were doing. This is the same reductionist stupid game that we play. It wasn't the rhythm. It wasn't the drums. It wasn't even me. It was everything coming together. This is the one in many problem that we were talking about last time. It's not the contingent parts of something. These constituent elements of everything, when you put them together, they can have a unity, and in that unity have an identity. When you take them apart, no one piece is the identity, right? The drummer is not the worship music any more than the guitar or the vocalist is. The coming together of all those things together and the response of the people to participate in it, that's when the music can be worshipful.
Right. I think art has an audience. And that's like, I say that really intentionally, because beauty, like that's that classic cliche, the beauty is in the eye of the beholder. But the sentence implies that there's a beholder. It's not just in space. It's like, why would you make this beautiful statue? It's Well, so people could see it, and it could be moving and edifying for them. As like that liturgical art is not done for one's own benefit. It's because it offers a glimpse at the divine. Like, it's an act of love. It is love towards one neighbor, immortalized in man's dominion over nature. We have these art pieces. They always have an audience, even if we don't know who it's going to be eventually. They're all to be perceived by and only appreciated by the people of God, of his creation. It's like, the more base animals, and I say that affectionately towards things in an appropriate way, of like dogs, cats, birds, they might find a utility in a sculpture, but they'll never grasp its ability to reveal beauty, and it won't edify them to grow in love of neighbor and love of God.
Josh, is it possible to put, which I love that Michelangelo quote, actually, that was really, really cool. But could you put the other one right before that up?
That is Garrett, by the way, our friend Garrett Skydema. Love you, bro.
Oh yeah. Hi, Garrett. But anyway, that one is really my answer, is participation. So the thing that he touches on there, either knowingly or unknowingly, is that what we know about the way that our brains process information and receive sensory data from the outside world and create our kind of mental perception is that it fills in a lot of gaps. Basically, we only have one tiny little point of attention, and then we kind of have a lot of fuzziness, and we just kind of fill in the gaps to create our perceptual apparatus. The
Your
thing
eyes
about
even work that way, literally. Yeah.
Yes,
the phobia.
yes, they do.
Yeah,
they do.
exactly.
Yes. And I mean, there's all kinds of fun little visual illusions out there that demonstrate this point, that like we have certain kind of preconceived notions, and those filter our perception very much. But the thing about good art, beautiful art, is that it's art that forces us to participate in the art because it's ambiguous in certain ways, or it challenges those preconceived notions, or it challenges those filters about the world. Like, my favorite style of art is Impressionism, because it takes something that is still recognizably something, like you look at, for example, Van Gogh's Starry Night, and like you can tell what it is, but there's just enough shade and like fuzziness and playing with color and shadow and positioning that it makes you kind of lean in and look harder and engage with it. Or even something like the Mona Lisa, her smile is this kind of like slightly, like, it kind of makes you wonder, like, what is she really smiling? Is she frowning? Like, what's her story? So again, it pulls you in and engages you, it participates you, and sometimes that participation is to shock you, like Picasso's Guernica, for example. Where it really just like gut punches you and takes you out. And so our really good art is art that forces our perceptual faculties to have to work to be able to make sense of it all. And so that's just a feature of who we are as human beings, which means material, which means body and plus soul, spirit, because they're very, very much entwined. And so for me, if that's just the way we're built, that's the way our church has to be. Our church has to be very participatory. It has to be the kind of thing that engages our prior experience just enough to create familiarity and context that creates meaning, but yet diverges enough to challenge us and subvert our expectations that we walk into the church with. But yet again, not too far, or else, the whole edifice crumbles. And so it's this very delicate line that requires a collaborative experience with all the people in the church to kind of come together and be participators in each other, participators in Christ, participators in the historical church, throughout the ages. Like, one of my most rewarding things I found is diving back into the early church fathers and the Ante-Nicene fathers and rereading. Actually, honestly, to be bluntly honest, reading for the very first time, because of my sola scriptura upbringing, reading them and understanding them a little bit better. And so just finding participatory community is what's going to, bring the church back and hopefully help us kind of create an island of beauty, real beauty, not flat beauty, but real beauty in a sea of, just flat surface materialism. And sorry, guys, with that, I'm going to have to duck out. So,
that's totally fine. I was going to say we're about 10 minutes away from the 2-hour mark.
All right.
If you got to go, Spencer, that's fine. Love you, bro. Thanks for your participation in this.
Thank you very much.
See you, Spencer.
Right on, buddy. And at the risk of not being able to get to it, we do have one more question here from Dale that I wanted to bring up. He said, people these days seem to have differing standards of artistic excellence. See abstract art versus classic. Is there only one standard art beauty, or has God designed us to value beauty differently? I think that's a really great question. I think that gets to the heart of some of our modern issues with this kind of relativistic, nothing is itself. It's all up to interpretation. It's all kind of muddled in the middle. And at this point, I think that's part of the reason why art stopped being emphasized in the way that it was, is that it became something that it doesn't draw us into a unity. It can be disputable. There's always these idiosyncrasies. And I think that's what it is the same thing that Dale's asking you a great question. It's the same thing that I think was the positive impact of the Protestant church to bring out the emphasis of the individual. That's the same disadvantage that brought about the breakdown of the art world, is the emphasis on the individual, on the detail, on the idiosyncrasy, the right nowness of something. Art used to be a way of condensing vast arrays of reality down into something really small. That's what an icon is, to be honest with you. We, in the modern world, in the digital age, we're using this language for something completely different. On my desktop, not my real desktop, but the digital one I have on a screen, on that desktop, I have a folder, not a real folder. It's just a picture of a folder that represents what folders actually do, right? And what we call it is an icon. An icon is just this condensation, this distillation of all this information inside down to this little thing. You see the thing and you're like, I know what's in there. But if you don't, then you click on it and it expands and you see all this idiosyncrasy. I think the reason why we can't have just the idiosyncrasy outside of a standard where there's that thing, it can't be condensed back down. Beauty can be iconic. It can be this thing. It is itself, right? But then there also is this fractal nature where you can see, like in the picture that I brought up of a dying house with living walls. It's very weird, right? But you can see beauty in there. And yet there's somebody with perhaps their idiosyncrasy or their cynicism would look at that and say, well, that used to be beautiful, but now it's just wrecked, right? I think that drawing out of the individual opinion and raising it to the standard, I think the individual opinion isn't the standard. I think the individual opinion is our privilege, but it isn't the standard. And I can be wrong about what's beautiful. I really do think that. I don't think that what's beautiful can be weighed and measured in an empirical, scientific sort of way. But I don't think that means that it isn't something that is, let's say, more objective than not. What do you guys think?
So the way I would approach this question is you can have beauty within different genres, and some of that will appeal to different personalities more than others. But what makes something beautiful isn't the genre that it's in, but what it's trying to point you towards, right? So if it's a beautiful punk rock song, it's because it's a life-giving punk rock song. But we know that there are punk rock songs that don't offer life, but are actually really nasty and just anarchy or whatever else it may be. And so I think it's not so much the genre, because there can be beauty within almost any genre. The question is it going to be a life-giving work of art within that genre, or a death-dealing work of art within that genre? I don't know if that makes sense, but that's kind of the way I'm thinking about it, because there are beautiful paintings in the classical style because they point us to something transcendent, or they point us to something real, or they point us to something that we all relate to. But someone could still paint in that classical style something very gory and gross and disturbing, and I would say that's not beautiful. Why? Because it was pointing me towards death and destruction and nastiness, instead of pointing me towards something life-giving and meaningful. So that's kind of how I would parse this question. It's like, it's not one genre is better than the other, but it's how you use that genre. What's the intention behind how you're using it? Are you trying to bring more life into the world, or are you trying to bring something more destructive into the world?
I think that's a good point, Dane. I do think there's a bit of a both and in a sense. And the example I give is like, there is inherent inclination towards perception of beauty. And I get at this with like symmetry, for instance. Most of our psychological metrics would say that people tend to rate people with like purely symmetrical faces as more attractive than the more symmetry a person possesses, typically the more attractive they're perceived. And I think there's a truth that's at the basic level of our passions in that regards, because it bears deeper treasure. If you eat typically more symmetrical fruit tends to be sweeter, or it's more ripe. It's more likely to continue to bear abundant fruit in the world because it possesses this inherent symmetry within itself. I think our psychology, in a sense, like if we're a disintegrated person, where we reflect an asymmetry between what we say and how we act. What we say we represent, and then what we do in our actions is ugly in a sense, or it can be. And yet, depending on how light hits asymmetry, there's a capacity for beauty in itself. Do you have that image I sent earlier, Josh, of the rose window by chance?
Let me try to pull that up real quick. You send it in the group chat, right?
Yeah.
Okay, hold on. One other thing that I was going to draw out that that Dane was just talking about is that you have this. How do I say it? You have this kind of inversion where you have beautiful things, and when I say beautiful things, we have like flowers and things like that. We have mountains, we have sunsets, we have things like that, and then you have an entirely different genre of things that could exist that are not necessarily what we would consider within the realm of beautiful, and a lot of them are death, destruction, decay. That's the one you're talking about, right?
Yeah, that's the one.
Okay, it's kind of blurry.
Yeah, sorry, it's not the best quality there. So this is the rose window at Sharp Cathedral, and it's there's actually a picture below, but I want to focus on the circular rose here in the center. And if you get the chance, I think it was Word on Fire Ministries actually put together a 10-minute video in a series called Wonder, where they explain the beautiful depth of this piece of art, the rose window at Sharp, and the reflection of nature's beauty into human artwork. I think is really well encapsulated here. There's a mathematical, I forget what the equation or principle of it is, but like if you're adding numbers in themselves, so like 1 and 1, and then 1 plus 2, and then 2 plus 1 is 3, and then you add the sequential number before. So 1 plus 1, 1 plus 2, 2 plus 2, and so forth. As you keep adding these integers up, it actually creates this perfect spiral that goes out geometrically. And if you see it in nature with roses and pine cones and all those pieces, that's actually present here in this window. And if you were to go to the dead center where the infant Christ is held in Mary's arms, you could draw 12 of these spirals out through any one of the circles around it, through the images through there, through the rectangular angles of asymmetry are actually 14 Davidic kings, some of which were good, most of which were murderous monsters who often offered children as burnt offerings to pagan gods, but still present in Jesus's genealogy set forth in Matthew's gospel. And you actually trace it out to those semicircles at the edge, and they would continue to expand infinitely. And so I'm butchering the description here. They do a lot better narration in the video, but effectively it demonstrates that God's presence extends beyond humanity's knowledge of history. And it's always been present and continues to be present, but ultimately reaches its unified zenith in the incarnation of Christ. And I think there's, like I was trying to say kind of clumsily before, but there is, I think, an objective sense of like humans have a predisposed ability to perceive beauty, whether it be through geometry or through compassion or things that resemble God and his characteristics, I think are going to be objectively viewed as beautiful, in as much as they're not, twisted in a sort of like a contemptuous affiliation. Well, I don't like God, so I don't like God's attributes. But if you didn't make the association, you probably view it as beautiful. And then on the other hand, we can see beauty in brokenness, in a sense, as long as light itself has the capacity to interact with the brokenness, it gives it the potential to be seen as beautiful.
That's actually kind of on the same vein as what I was about to say, is that there are these categories of things that don't fit into what we would consider a standard kind of beauty. And yet when they're baptized into Christ, even the macabre, vulgar, profane things like torture instruments and blood and wounds, right, those are all things that we can find remarkable depth of beauty in, that draw us into the divine as well. Something like a crucifix, it's like this thing that atheists and all their cynicism and technical correctness are just missing. It's a torture device. Why aren't you wearing like an electric chair around your neck? Like, no, you don't. The thing, the object, really finds its relevance in the context of a narrative, not in simply what it's made of or what it happens to perform a function for, right? We aren't materialists. That's why the cross is beautiful, because materialism is false. The cross is, to me, one of those obvious things where it is the center and the exception. It's really weird, but it's the center and the exception. You look at the cross and you can see it is horrendous and murderous and terrible and just an abomination. It's the murder of the Most High God. And yet, it's one of the most beautiful things you will ever lay eyes on when it hits your heart, not just your eyes, right? I think, man, this conversation has me ready to cry right now. I am super thankful that Spencer got to hop on here with us. I thank you, Nicholas, also for your time. I think since we've passed the 2-hour mark and we're kind of getting into a place where I'm out of pictures and where our viewers are starting to diminish a little bit, we're stretching the time here. So I think it's a good time to round off the end here. But do you guys have any closing thoughts?
I'm just thankful for the opportunity to meet together with you guys. Dane, it's great to finally meet you, and appreciate getting the chance to be on with Spencer and of course Tyler and you, Josh. I think the dialogue is excellent, and we really hit on a couple of really important pieces tonight, and yeah, just appreciative of the whole process.
Yeah, I'm really glad to have met you, Nicholas. I did watch the video that y'all did around some of the paranormal experiences that you've had and those kind of things, and found that video to be really interesting. And, it ties into this discussion that the world is more than just the physical. And so I've really enjoyed tonight. I've enjoyed Spencer's contributions, and Josh, you as well, Nick, you as well. And I think we already have a part 3 planned, so I look forward to that as well. And my last thought is going to tie into Josh, your last thought. And it's not to send us down a whole nother conversation, because I know we're wrapping up, but St. Maximus the Confessor writes about how when Christ was on the cross, he was creating the universe. And it's this moment that transcends time. And, St. Maximus was thinking on a whole different level than most of us do. But I think it's really interesting, because it's like when humanity is doing the most destructive thing possible, crucifying the God-man who came to save them, that God is doing the most creative thing possible and actually creating the universe and recreating it at the same time. So there is something utterly astonishing, and we'll be contemplating it forever. The beauty of the cross and how it's the most destructive and creative act at the exact same time.
That's beautiful, man. Wow. Reminds me of another quote that I think would be cool to end on, to allow people to kind of, let's say, meditate on some of these things. And I believe it also was from Maximus the Confessor, if I'm not wrong. And I shared this with the groups that the group chats that I participate in, and of all the people, Garrett happened to show up tonight in the chat, and I think he's repeated it back to me more than anybody else, is that every depth has a surface, but not every surface has a great depth. And there are some times when you dive into something and you're like, wow, there is just not a bottom to this thing. And I think the cross is one of those times. I think that's one of those times. You'll never get to the bottom of it. And boy, if it was just the physical objects of that wood and all that stuff, man, the bottom would be real easy to find. But again, I believe that the cross is one of those main displays of the falsity of the materialistic worldview. And
Amen.
Man, what a blessing. This is so cool. Like I said, I'm like trying to breathe regularly so my eyes don't get full. So I with that, I'm gonna, in the spirit of my brother Tyler, who is not on the episode anymore. I wish he would have participated more, but he had to go. Thank you everybody for listening. Please like and subscribe. Like this video, subscribe to the channel. If you're not subscribed to Faith Unaltered, subscribe there. If you're not subscribed to Complete Sinner's Guide channel, please subscribe there. If anybody wants to reach out and talk about some of these things, or perhaps participate in a future episode, leave your thoughts in the comments. I read them. I want to interact with you. This is not just a show. We're really interested in this stuff. We're really trying to think carefully and move forward. It's hard to stumble through thinking that's this complex. And so, we're looking for like-minded, kindred spirits to come alongside and be like, look, man, the world ain't cutting the mustard. We need to go back to the center. We need the center again. And so with that, everybody, good night. God bless, and stay like Christ.